get started. A day like today, I can't help but think of all of the things that we rely on urban trees for. So whether they recognize it or not, urban city dwellers, particularly in the northeastern US, rely on trees for a whole host of environmental services. So they can improve aesthetics, sequester carbon, mitigate flooding, very big issue today, improve local air quality, provide habitat for wildlife, and on and on. But the algebra of an urban tree's benefits shifts once it reaches the end of its life cycle. Dead and declining street trees must be removed, preferably before they pose a serious risk to people and property. And historically, once those trees come down, the resulting wood becomes a waste product and needs to be disposed of. But what if instead of having that as a problem to solve, it could be a solution to other needs? And that brings us to our speakers today, who are actively working towards addressing those needs and solving that problem. First up, we're joined by Ben Christensen, who has his bachelor's in environmental management and protection from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, his master's in environmental management from the Yale School of the Environment, and is also an alum of the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. As the CEO of Cambium Carbon, he is actively working to achieve global carbon negativity by 2060. We're very pleased to be joined by you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Is it helpful to do sort of a bigger introduction? You're going to pass to Sean, or you want me to go full dive?
I think you can dive right on in.
Great. Awesome. Well, really excited to be here with you all. As Megan said, my name is Ben Christensen, CEO and co-founder of Cambium Carbon. Have really been focused on trying to address climate change in a big way. I also grew up deeply around wood. My dad was a carpenter and a construction worker, spent a lot of time in the shop growing up, and think it's really amazing and feel so lucky to have found a solution that addresses a really big existential problem that I care a lot about and can be so impactful every day. So really lucky to be here. So grateful to have Sean on this call, and obviously he's gonna go next, but have benefited so much from learning in the space from so many people who have come before, and excited to dive in there. So just talking a little bit more about what Cambium Carbon does, how we sort of approach things, and our goals. I will start to share my screen here. Our core goal is to really connect in national sort of contracts and sort of how do we bring in larger players into this space, and how do we really connect urban wood waste into markets that then can create scalability there. So share my screen here. Can you all see that? Thumbs up.
Yeah,
great.
Good.
Awesome. So just to double click on that, our goal is to really help connect across scales. So utilizing technology as well as really creating the enabling conditions so that we can use and salvage wood in our cities. And just to do a quick grounding sort of on scale there's about 46 million tons of tree waste that comes down in cities every year. And again, when we're talking about cities, and I'm sure Sean will talk about this more, that wood is coming from a number of different sources. We call it the 4Ds, so it's disaster, coming down because of decay, and then development is really a big part of it. And so when you think about, the reasons that are driving that forest loss, there's lots of them, and there's a huge scale. But a lot of those trees, come from streets, from parks, but also from, new developments. It's pretty much anywhere that, traditional forestry isn't managing, and it's a huge volume of trees. So our goal is to help, connect those trees when they come down into highest and best uses, working with partners like Camp Small, and then, lots of other folks across the country as well. So just a little bit more on how we sort of frame and think about the problem. So we think a lot about supply chains. If you talk to folks, supply chains are a really top line issue. And what's really exciting is using urban wood is a huge opportunity for us to really address some of those supply chains issues. So right now, supply chains are big and long and inefficient, and also really bad for the environment. What we are really trying to create are, addressing that, really starting with wood. And again, thinking about how sort of traditional supply chains look, it depends, right? You all know, forestry really well, but we often see these really extended supply chains, particularly within furniture, right? And there's certainly cases where, we use relatively local wood. There's lots of, wood products, but we also do a lot of shipping. We were working with a client recently that was cutting down their trees just outside of Baltimore, shipping them to Italy, and then to get processed and then coming back, right? That doesn't make sense. It's a really inefficient way to do it. So these supply chains are long, they're inefficient, they're not tech enabled. We're not able to actually track and manage those materials. And so that's a big challenge with what we're building. And what we're really trying to do is create and connect and help build up all of this work that has gone on over the last, really 30 to 50 years, building and establishing local production. And so our big vision is, can you create a national network of suppliers where you can really connect local sourcing to local production, connect that into local distribution, and then create local markets for national clients. So if you're a big buyer, a big, somebody who buys wood at scale, can you be able to access wood, in a really big way through a more affordable, environmentally efficient and tech-driven supply chain? So that's what we're really going after. And doing this at scale, is a huge climate solution. It's also a really big jobs creation solution. And it's a way to sort of transform and rewrite how we think about our economy, which is really important. So we talk about it as carbon smart wood. That's what we're really trying to push and bring to market here. And what we think about that as is, again, locally salvaged. So really importantly, sourced from trees that were not harvested, so trees that were not cut down to be used. They're trees that are coming down anyway. Something that we also think about, obviously, is local processing. How do we really make sure that chain of custody is transparent? So if you're taking down that wood, processing it, locally, and making sure that we're telling that story really effectively. And then third part for us is, reinvesting in local trees. We're a public benefit corporation. We're really focused on, creating value in our communities. And so for us, 15% of all of our profits go directly back into local tree canopy restoration with a focus on tree equity. We work with amazing partners in our cities. And so we feel really excited about that. Just to sort of tie together how we think about the sort of core supply chain here is there's sort of the initial sourcing of wood, wood that's coming down from tree care and hazard removal, and connecting arborists, cities, different folks into offtake solutions. So it's sort of going from waste into local processing. So how can you connect that urban manufacturing into accessing this wood at scale? There's lots of challenges there. There's all kinds of challenges around how do you move those logs. There's challenges around how do you coordinate those logs. And there's lots of different pieces, but we're really working to troubleshoot and work through those. And then if you're going to do this at scale, we really believe that having the right type of market on all of this is super important. So how do you connect, again, those local producers into national buyers and do that in a really big way? And then how can you connect that all back into reinvesting in community forestry? So how does this scale? What are the sort of big top line numbers? Local wood reuse can create massive climate impact. So when we think about, scale here, there's a really, really big opportunity. So in the US, it's somewhere around top line 260 million megaton or metric tons. And then globally, it's 1.2 gigatons, which is a massive, massive volume. A big thing for us is, really focusing on how do we, do this in a way that is people first, that really focuses on workforce development. I think that's something we've seen in a big way on the decon side, and it's something that's becoming more prevalent on the fresh cut side as well. I'm sure Sean will talk about that too, but one of the projects we're working on is in the city of Philadelphia, where we are working with a local workforce development nonprofit to set up, a wood reuse sort yard and help start building scale there. And I think it's really, really important that we continue to think about jobs creation and access in all of this. Last thing I'll say is, this wood can be really beautiful and is really important. This is a carbon smart wood wall that our team from the Baltimore Fallen Lumber Company did. And it's awesome, right? This wood has a ton of value and it just requires care and the right people to use it and a lot of time. And then you're able to produce something pretty amazing. So that's what I wanted to highlight. Last thing that I would say sort of about how we are building out our process and what we're really focused on is there's lots of moving parts, right? You're trying to connect source, material with lots of different folks, different data sets, different information into local processing, trying to do that in the most efficient, localized way as possible. And then you're trying to connect processors into the right type of market. How do you do all of that at scale? So we're really trying to build out the technology that underlies that can manage that data, that can create interoperability across those different uses and help us really manage, these pieces in bigger ways. We also really recognize that we have a lot to continue to learn from local partners, from the industry, and there's a lot of parts of, sort of the urban wood space that has a lot to learn from traditional forestry and traditional, wood products. And so continuing to try to build that and pull it in is really important for us as well. Again, one of the other things we're really trying to launch and build out here is, a clear brand, that allows us to do this storytelling really well. So again, this is Carbon Smart Wood and how we're talking about it and bringing that to market. The other key thing that is really, really important for us is being able to track it along the process. And that's something that we've built and is mostly functional. There are ways that we're continuing to really grow and make sure that you can see, all right, where did this tree came from? Who touched it along the way, and how do we grow that and tell that story really efficiently in a way that we feel really, really confident about. So that's what we're going after there. And then the last, piece that we feel really excited about in Baltimore in particular is we integrated with the team at OE Custom and have formed Baltimore Fallen Lumber. We have amazing group of, really experienced sawyers and millers who have been working in the Baltimore space for a really long time, continuing to really invest in growing in that space. How can we produce more and more lumber, is sort of our top line goal. I think something we need to think about when we use this wood more broadly. Right now, the vast majority of urban wood is being used for sort of more custom builds. And there's definitely some lumber production going on, but when we do a lot of custom work, it means that, there's good margins, it's good for lots of local businesses, but it doesn't really translate into scale or addressing this problem. And what we want to start doing is how do we create some bigger scale there? And so we're really working on that in Baltimore as well, and is in a number of other cities. So that's sort of the top line. Happy to stop there and pass the mic over. Last thing I'll say is we're really excited about, again, continuing to learn. We are still new in this space in some ways. We've been around for about 3.5 years, continuing to really grow and learn, and have been so grateful to learn from folks before us. Have gotten a ton of help along the way, and our goal is to really connect across scales and continue to do that in bigger and better ways. So excited to be here, and thank you all.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. Before we move on to Sean, I just will remind folks, if you have questions for our panelists, to please enter those in the Q&A chat. I believe I saw a participant with their hand raised, and we're not equipped to do a kind of live engaged chat in that sort of fashion. But please do ask those questions via the chat box. We'll be happy to go over those at the end of the session. So next up, we have Sean Preston, who is the recycling coordinator for Baltimore City's Forestry Division. In this position, Sean manages the city sort yard at Camp Small, as well as its sawmill and wood reutilization program. When he's not grading, sorting, sawing, or making something out of wood, Sean enjoys being outside with his family and adventuring into Maryland's forests and streams. So welcome, Sean, and I will get your slides pulled up for you here real quick.
Thanks, Megan. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's nice to do this along with Ben. Ben and I have been working together and having conversations now for several years, and it's really great the work that he's doing on such a big scale. Helping this thing grow across the country, and sharing these concepts and methods and trying to find a way to create a bigger stream is going to be huge as this continues to grow, which it is inevitable. So let's see. So I came into this position with Baltimore City in 2016. Camp Small is and has been for about 100 years the drop-off location for the city's wood waste. And that's specific to the city-owned trees, street trees primarily, and also open park trees. If it falls in the forest, stays in the forest. But we collect about 9,000 tons of material a year, give or take, and that's been steadily increasing from year to year. So when I was brought in, can you go to the next slide, Megan? Thanks. When I was brought in, it was sort of just to figure out what could be done with the material that was here. It was recognized by the Department of Recreation and Parks and Forestry, along with the Office of Sustainability in Baltimore City, that there were a lot of high value materials that were coming in here, and if there was a way to capture it, a program could be developed around that. And so I came in with full transparency, little experience doing something like this. My background was fine art, and I was a fabricator in the city, and I was self-employed. I managed a metal shop. I did woodworking. I worked with a lot of museums doing installation and build out of exhibits. So this was something I really wanted to get into forestry, and found it challenging. And this job allowed me to use some of my sort of make it happen kind of attitude to put it work. And the first thing that I had to do is figure out what markets were in the area for this material. And in its raw form, we didn't have any ways of processing the material. All I had was a track loader. And the material that we had were, whole logs, 6 inches to 60 inches in diameter, 2 feet long, to 14 feet long, and a whole lot of wood chips and brush. And I was able to find some markets. I was able to start distributing the wood chips to community gardens and and public spaces, to composters. We were able to sell log rounds to turners that like to build out of green material. And then we were able to find some buyers of whole logs that had a sawmill, a smaller kind of operation. And one of those was OE Custom, who Ben was talking about. And so it was very limited. We were able to do some play spaces, but not a whole lot could we do with the raw material. And it became evident that the program's success was going to depend on us building out an infrastructure to be able to produce the products ourselves. The challenges that we faced, otherwise, were that local larger sawmills weren't really interested in the material, and those that were either a distance away and or required us to haul the material to them, which we just did not have the infrastructure for. So next slide, please. So that led to us trying to find a way to get a sawmill and produce lumber, and make some wood products. We were able to get a grant. I'm actually skipping ahead, so let me go back to this slide here. A low-hanging fruit that I kind of stumbled upon was when I started here at Camp Small. It's a centralized location in the city, about 5 acres. Our utility company was doing a clearing at the Camp Small site to put a substation in, a deal that was already previously struck with the city and the utility company. But they were taking out about 2 acres of woodland, so I was able to walk through that stand and mark which logs we wanted to retain. That's something that we've continued to do when our utility companies are doing land clearing in the city, but it hadn't been done previously. So we were able to harvest out of that stand about 18,000 board feet of lumber. It was poplar and ash and walnut. We were able to deliver those logs to a local sawmill, and we had them mill them and kiln dry them to our specification to be used for city projects. So we had some of them treated, some poplar boards treated for decking, and the majority of it got milled into tongue and groove boards that went into our Cahill Recreation Center, which had just sort of got off the design had just got off the ground. They had spec'd to do the whole interior. You can see it in some of the photos here, in wood cladding, and we had just enough to do that whole project. It saved the department about $60,000 or $70,000. It's a beautiful example, physical example of what can be done with very little infrastructure. I mean, it required hiring me and or hiring a person, not necessarily me, to find sort of just connect the dots. And since then, we've done several other big projects like that. The most recent one is our Middle Branch Wellness Center, where we did 10,000 board foot of ash boards that are ceiling clad. And next slide, please. And so that's about when we started the need for the sawmill, and we were able to get a grant from American Forests for $40,000 to start our program. It allowed us afforded us to buy the Wood Miser sawmill that we have, a kiln, a dehumidification kiln, and also a firewood splitter. At this time, it was still just me at Camp Small. So even though I got the equipment, it was pretty hard to put it to use. I was sort of able to pull hands over here to help me out on occasion, but I wasn't really able to ramp up production. So, finding a way to get other staff became the next big hurdle. And we started wrapping our heads around doing a workforce development program. And at that time, we started working also with the U.S. Forest Service, who had developed a Baltimore wood project around the same time that I came on board. And that project, it was looking at it started off looking at the salvage material that a company, Details and Brick and Board, were doing here in Baltimore, where they were going in and sort of carefully demolishing row homes and capturing valuable material out of the row homes, and then repurposing them and distributing. And so we became the other side to that project, where it was also looking at the fresh cut material. And that really allowed this project to get some national attention and kind of be shaped as a model. It also allowed us the Forest Service helped us to put together a very large business proposal to ramp up and scale up. That proposal, which is public and available online, it can be found still at the Baltimore Wood Project website, looks at ramping up to a large scale on our 4.5 acre site, 12 staff, and looks at taking in private material. So it's sort of still the goal of where we would like to get to, but what we ended up doing was that was altogether maybe a $2.5 million investment into that project, but it did show that it would have a positive return on investment within 10 years. Our our city has an innovation fund which allows agencies to apply to it with ideas like Camp Small that have a positive return on investment. And the innovation fund will award those programs a financial start to pay back within 5 years. It was how the program started in 2016 with $100,000. It's a 5-year payback, and we had paid back that first one within about a year and a half. So we were on good standing. And when we gave them our business plan, they were eager and excited to help us. They gave us about $900,000. You can go to the next slide, Megan. I'm rambling on and not paying attention to the photos. So, but they gave us about $900,000 to ramp up, and that's really building out our program to a larger scale to get the the staff that we needed, to get additional kilns, additional equipment to help us. We're now a 2-person staff. We are working on trying to develop and put to place that workforce development program. And as a 2-person staff right now, we pull in about $100,000 a year. We produce about 50,000 board feet of material. 25 of it is kiln dried material. The rest goes into products like you see there that Nick and my colleague and I are sitting on benches and stools that we mill up and distribute to the communities, city schools, parks, residents. Everything that we do is we sell everything. We're fortunate that with our city we have something in place that allows us to sell products, and not a lot of cities have that. So they've developed public-private partnerships to be able to distribute their material. Baltimore City has something in their procurement office that's called public surplus, and it allows us to capture the highest value possible for city goods. That was already in place, and I think had been in place for about 80 years when they started digging up cobblestones. And it's allowed our program to do what it does. And again, it's such a challenge for other cities. So you can skip ahead to the next one. This sort of goes into where we're going, what we're trying to do. The larger innovation fund is going to afford us a horizontal grinder, which is a solution, one solution to a large amount of material that we can't process into high value stuff. Maybe about 70% of the material that comes in here can't be utilized as lumber, and it's hard to move that material, and it becomes a big cost for the city, an ongoing cost to have somebody come in and haul that away. I think currently we pay as much as $40 a ton to remove that material, whereas the investment of a $900,000 grinder can turn all of that into profit. So that's what we are currently looking at. In the exploration of that, a lot of things that have come up, ways to sequester the carbon in the logs, producing biochar out of that low grade stuff, which has a number of benefits. So as we're moving into that final stage of phase 2, where we're purchasing the equipment, we're putting a lot of thought into what we want here to deal with that 70% of material, of excess material. you know, we've had a year or two under our belt of producing lumber and kiln dried lumber off of our mill, and we can see that is a growing revenue stream. You know, as Ben was talking about and what he's developing, you know, that's going to continue to grow, and we can continue to invest and grow into that. But you know, until we increase our supply that we get in, we're going to run out of lumber that we can timber that's suitable for lumber. So figuring out a good sustainable solution to the other 70% is a big focus for us right now. You can go to the next slide, please. We have lots of partners. We're fortunate to have so many great partners that have helped us to get where we are and helping us solve this problem as we continue to grow. And that's all I've got. I thank you so much, and I look forward to the question and answers.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. I think one of the things I had jotted down was wanting to hear more about some of the partnerships. So maybe we'll get back around to this slide later, but I'm going to stop sharing for now. And looking to the Q&A chat. So first up, we have a question from Hussein, who asks, wood that is part of advanced materials is growing rapidly. Any practical applications or pilots that have better potential for local production?
I can take a first crack at that, and then feel free to jump in if you have thoughts on this, Sean. You know, I think that there is a lot of different pieces. You know, I've seen some pretty crazy applications of wood. I would also say that there's, you know, a lot of other uses for sort of advanced materials that come from some of the derivative products, particularly from that lower value. So Sean was talking about biochar, you know, and when you think about sort of the type of wood that's coming down, as Sean was really highlighting, you definitely cannot mill and use all of that, right? You know, that's something that you really can't do. But there's a significant amount of biomass there that we want to make sure we use. By converting it into biochar, you know, you start to get into a place where there's all of these derivative products for advanced materials. You know, there are people who take that biochar and can turn it into graphene, for instance, which is used in all kinds of sort of advanced material applications. So that's one good example. And then the other two things that I would say we're thinking about a lot and working on developing testing, you know, within sort of the urban wood space is thermally modified wood. We think that's going to be a really important part of solving this. And one of the key things that is a challenge with urban wood is it's a higher character product, just generally. You know, there's more complexity within the wood, which means it's a little bit less consistent when you see it. And so having a process like thermally modified wood, which is where you're transforming, you know, the wood through heating and some of the other parts of that process, you can create really hyper sustainable outdoor material that also has a really consistent finish. And so I think that's a really exciting application, you know, for decking and siding and a lot of outdoor applications. And then I think the other one, you know, that we're thinking about and starting to be in testing is thinking about mass timber, you know, and CLT. And so, you know, that right now, the vast majority of that is softwoods. You know, a large majority of urban forests are hardwoods. And so there's a lot of testing that needs to be done there, but conceptually, there's, you know, it makes sense. It has to be proven, it has to be built out. So we're starting to work on that as well. So those are sort of the key categories I'm thinking about there.
Yeah, yeah, those are great. The you know, was the question, Megan, to you know, to start like how, like what sort of things are out there to start like a pilot program? Is that so somebody like thinking about what they could do, like low hanging fruit? Is that, am I right there?
That may be a question. I think he was focused a bit on the advanced materials question. So I think maybe some of what you had mentioned about biochar might have addressed some of that question for him.
Right. Yeah, Ben's points were really good. That's those are sort of the innovative things, and it's other than the timber product, the the biochar and thermally modified wood, those practices have been happening for so long now. Thermally modified wood, has been being made in overseas for over a century, and biochar has been used for millennia. So so there's a lot out there to learn from already, and taking it to scale, is a lot of technological advances, sort of changing the methods and the practices, and then also applying it to, especially with biochar, to our urban areas to solve, it was always used for agriculture. But now looking at it as ways to do water filtration, as needed nutrients for our urban tree plantings, and a lot of it could go into those practices. And so that's another way that this thing kind of becomes circular, is the tree comes down, it's not suitable for lumber, gets turned into biochar, and then that use gets put into the saplings going into the trees. So there's a lot of potential there. There's a lot of people making some good companies making units that are user friendly, that are cost efficient, and that are mobile. They they are not a fire hazard. They don't require any sort of hookups, and they can produce a whole lot. So it's not just logs that can go into those. It's wood chips, it's brush. So those are a great problem solver for space as well, because you're taking a high volume of material and turning it into a low volume product that has a high resale.
Great. So the next question we have from Fred, who is asking, I'd be interested in hearing more from Ben about Cambium Carbon's collaboration, PowerCore PHL, and Philadelphia's Department of Parks and Recreation in regard to workforce development, and from Sean about the status and future of workforce development at Camp Small, whether this would be similar to the arrangement in Philadelphia.
Sure. I'll take first pass. And so what we're really trying to do in Philadelphia, and I think Sean has really been a pioneer of this, in Baltimore, and there's a couple of other cities that are doing it, but in different ways and in different scales. But again, how do we think about really managing the city side of, waste that comes down, and, doing that at scale? So we're working with the city of Philadelphia to help do that. And sort of the model that we've set up there is, site, logs coming in, same thing, sort of all tied into a sort yard in a similar way, but having it fully run, outside of the city, so operated by a nonprofit that is sort of external from the city, which is PowerCore Philadelphia. They're an awesome, really, really seasoned workforce development nonprofit that focuses on youth with barriers to employment. They've got lots of different programming. They have lots of programming sort of around arboriculture. They do a lot of tree planting. They do a lot of, urban reforestation activities. So they already have, some adjacent skills. And what we're really working with them on is how do we create, again, training programs and standards of practice, and start building, the workforce that we're going to need to do this. I think something that Sean was highlighting is there's some key constraints, when we think about this problem as a whole to get it to scale. And one of the biggest ones there is having a trained workforce and, having people who know how to deal with this wood, who know how to deal with some of the challenges of, processing it, milling it, all the different parts there. And so if we can start creating that in a bigger way, that's really exciting. The other thing that we're really excited about is placement. One of the things that we're working on, right, is we work with shops all across the country. And so we have about 95 different, folks who we work with nationally, who are part of our sort of ecosystem, who are on our software, who we, are sourcing wood from. And what we get excited about is if we can create, a stronger growing workforce in sort of core regional hubs, hopefully we can really translate that into growing businesses that are going to want people who are trained. So really trying to make sure that we're not just doing training, but also really focused on placement. And the last thing I would say, we're working with Philly Parks and Rec, a number of other key stakeholders there, and really trying to get that project off the ground and troubleshoot it. All of that has been funded through the city and a couple of other grants, including the U.S. Forest Service. And yeah, that's sort of the top line overview. Happy to double click elsewhere, but Sean has a much better line of sight on how workforce development is actively working in this. We're sort of launching in about 3 months, and so I'll pass it to Sean.
I wish I did have an example of it actively working. Unfortunately, I don't. We hit some hurdles with our, we put this. We had to go out to bid. We're a city, and this is a big purchase for us, a big service. So we had to go out to bid because the way that we wanted to run our workforce development was to do a public-private partnership with a nonprofit, to rely on somebody who already had a workforce development program in place, sort of like what you're doing, Ben, or who you're working with in Philadelphia. So a similar thing to that, where we're relying on somebody else who doesn't necessarily have to be doing tree work, but would hopefully be sort of giving a base level of skills to somebody and kind of vetting them into something that's, for example, if we're working with a workforce development organization who mostly supplies custodial services, those people coming over to us, it's going to be a huge transformation. So, and a lot of people probably would be surprised by the amount of heavy labor outside in all weather conditions that you're required to do. So going into, at least knowing what you're getting into there. So we were looking for, partners that would sort of be able to give people a baseline of this work. And then, we were looking to do 6 employees a year, 6 trainees a year, paying a living wage to that company for those employees. They would stay under their liability, under their insurance. We would develop those sort of requirements that employer is giving to those employees while they're with us. And then while they're with us for a 6-month period of training, we would be teaching them a wood shop 101. We have a wood shop in our facility now, to do just basic things. And we would be giving them heavy equipment operation skills. So we have a excavator, front end loaders, skid steers, forklifts. So we'd be able to train them on those things. And then as well in the sawmill and drying wood, species identification, those things around forestry related things. But and with the hope that somewhere in there, each an individual is going to become attached to one of those things, whether it's the wood shop skills or the sawmill skills or the forestry related things, or heavy equipment. I mean, heavy equipment operation would be a huge one. I would imagine that 60% of the people who left here would probably go into that would be a really direct, clear career path for them if they left with certification. And it would open up doors where we're not just sort of training people for these forestry related, jobs, but they would be able to leave and, being a city operation, they'd have opportunities at our Department of Public Works, at, Department of Transportation. They'd have opportunities working with the various wood shops and connections that we have here in Baltimore through our lumber production. So sort of giving them a really good base, trying to provide certification and support on the end where they're working with their employer for job placement.
Great. Our next question might be a short reply. We'll see. For Sean, can you imagine a time when BCRP's forests will be logged for revenue?
No, that's a nightmare. No, that will never happen. Me and Megan will make sure that never happens.
We would riot.
I do think it's an important point to touch on.
Yeah, and I think that I heard somebody who's really been doing this kind of work for a long time on the West Coast and the Northwest talk about sort of conscious tree planting, and they were looking at planting on the medians, so working with like DOT to plant trees in the highway medians that would be specific to come down in 50 years as timber. So creating forest stands in urban areas that are strictly meant for harvesting timber out of at a certain point. Is that a bad idea? I think it's one that causes a lot of debate and a conversation. But I think at the very least, it's really smart for us to consider what we're planting in our urban areas and what the end use of those trees are going to be. If all we're planting are red maples, like what's the end use of the red maple? If we're not pruning trees so that they can produce 9-foot yield logs, we're destining them for low waste stream end use. So I think it's really important to tie that into this conversation of what species of trees we're planting and how we're taking care of those trees and pruning them for best end use.
Yeah, and sort of if you'd like to continue to expand, the second part of Thayer's question with that was whether logging for revenue, or in this case, we can just kind of broaden it to kind of this longer term thinking, is whether this is in conflict with the goal of forest preservation. And I think that you've kind of touched on a way in which it's actually, supplementing those larger goals towards, if nothing else, like you said earlier, we don't tend to utilize the trees that fall in a forested natural area. We're primarily talking about street tree usage, but still having these additional considerations like our management approach. I hadn't even thought about the pruning aspects of, pruning for structure that could lead to better wood utilization down the road, but as well as, planting diversity and all these other kind of long-term topics. And sort of a related question, an anonymous attendee had asked how you will ensure quality logs come from urban areas versus logs coming in from clear cutting and other harvesting practices that may be looking for overseas profit.
For sure. I'll jump in there with a couple quick thoughts, and I think Sean framed it really well. And I think one of the biggest things that we care a lot about is what you don't want to do in this space, right, is create perverse incentives that then lead to us cutting down trees that we shouldn't cut down, right? And, I think a big part of something we care about a lot is continuing to think about and act, in the space is utilizing a waste stream. And if we're doing that, that means we have to really be utilizing a waste stream and not creating incentives in a market where we are doing sort of active harvesting there. I think it is really smart to do sort of longer term planning. I think conversations around how are you being savvy about, climate resilient planting, as well as thinking about end of life, really, really important. But I think for us, what's really important, again, as this starts to scale and it's just not big enough, there's not enough demand yet to actually create those incentives, but there will be. That's something that I think is really good, but it has to be done in the right way. And so, one of the biggest things that I think is highlighted in sort of both of those questions is chain of custody. Do you know why a tree was coming down? Can you show it? Can you tell that, consistently? Do you know then how that tree got moved, where it was going, and then what happened next? And this is a challenge, it's fairly analogous to like the carbon markets right now. If you are doing an improved forest management credit and you're saying, hey, this project was, we're protecting it and it was going to be cut down, but now it's not. That's sort of a similar piece to saying this tree was planned to be cut down, or it came down in a storm. It came down naturally, right? And I think that's a really important piece of, what we are focusing on. For us, that's what our software is all about, is moving away from certification, in the sense of, that's what a lot of our big sort of sustainable certifications are now, which is really good, but that comes from having really extended supply chains, not really knowing where our wood came from. And for us, that goes to, we want to know where every single board came from, which tree it came from, and, have sort of full chain of custody there. So there are challenges there, but we take that really, really seriously and are really, really pushing on that and have a zero tolerance policy for us, across the board on anything that comes in that was harvested. And that's something that we're going to really continue to push and make sure we're super, super clear on is you can't move that line at all, because I think it's a really slippery slope. And I think it's something we have to be very aware of in this space.
Yeah, great points. And finally, a question from Jim. You're suggesting that market growth is inevitable. What markets are you projecting other than small local processing that is custom craft wood heavily taxpayer subsidized? He notes, $100,000 annual gross for 2 employees, wouldn't be viable as a business model, and asks for more details on business plan for, for less than saw log value material processing and selling this mixed raw material, including labor cost.
Oh yeah. Is my contact information will be provided to everyone, will it not?
I think I'll see if there's a whiteboard option where I can share both yours and Ben's email addresses for further questions.
Because that's a pretty in-depth answer there that I don't think I could, give here. But yeah, so having a camp small attendant is sort of built in. So I'm not really part of a revenue stream. I'm just here as a manager for the yard, sorting it. It's a lot of incoming material, lots of trucks come in. We get about 30 trucks that come in a day here. So my job basically is sort the stuff. Everything else is, a bonus to the city, kind of. And Nick as well, as we've developed, my colleague. So, our revenue, whatever we pull in, is to pay back for our equipment and then to afford us a workforce development. The $100,000 a year that we're pulling in right now is, not going towards any staff to me or my colleagues. The plan as it is, is to increase our lumber production. Well, we're already there. Our lumber production is supposed to be right around $100,000 in revenue. The 350,000 a year that is our target will be actually produced through that low waste stream, through mulch revenue, mulch sales, or something of the such. the city of Baltimore currently spends about $120,000 a year on those products that they purchase from, the private market. We can produce that in-house as a savings. So that alone is a justification to purchase a grinder that can be paid back within 10 years. But I mean, I have all that information, and really, I think probably all the answers to those questions are within that business proposal. So if you went to the Baltimore Wood Project, you could look at that 60-page budget analysis, business analysis, and see. But I'm more than happy to provide you with any information that you need. It's all on hand, so it would be no problem at all.
Great. Yeah. So I've got the email addresses for both of our panelists on display now. So folks that are interested in getting in touch with them, please jot those down. As we are running short on time, I'm going to turn things back to Gary, but first wanted to thank both Ben and Sean again for joining today and providing all this great info and expertise and great discussion. So thank you.
Thank you all. We appreciate it.
Okay. We just have to go back to the beginning, I think. Megan, how do we do that? Did I screw something up here?
What are you looking to do at the moment?
There we go.
You said you wanted to share something. Yeah.
There you go. Friends, thank you very much for tuning in to this webinar. We're very pleased you could join us for the Framing the Future series. Hope you'll tune in again on the 3rd Thursday of January for a brand new webinar. In closing, I'd like to bring your attention to some follow-up for the October webinar that we had, which was focused on the a general preview of a new program that is now going to be available on Maryland Public Television on December 24th. That is Forest Her. So for those of you who would like to see the full film, at that time in October, we only showed a few excerpts from it. But if you'd like to see the full film on Maryland Public Television, the first scheduled showing, hopefully not the last, will be on December 24th at 2:30 p.m. I urge you to put that on your schedule, take a look, and maybe DVR it if it's not convenient for you in the holiday season. But in the meantime, we want to wish all of you a wondrous holiday, and thank you very much for tuning in on the Framing the Future series. Have a good day, all of you. Thank you very much for your time today.